Top of the morning, Dan and Amy, House Majority Leader, soon to be House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy on CNBC's Squawk Box yesterday, talking about the sentencing memos released on Friday, all the discussion over the ensuing 3 days. Here's McCarthy's take.
What did Schiff say before any investigation started more than 2 years ago? That he had proof. He has no credibility on either side of the aisle when it comes inside the House. If you hire an attorney to deal with your issues, you assume that attorney is going to follow the legal bounds. If this is a campaign finance problem, how are members going to look at themselves as the number of their own problems of campaign finance, which is normally a fine? Are they going to leave office? I think it's hyperbole of what they're doing. But what's going to happen here is their base is so ginned up that are they going to be able to control themselves in this process? But there's nothing there that's impeachable. From my standpoint of view, if they went down that road, they would lose but politically they would lose as well. Everything they've laid out, I think, builds the case that there's nothing there. You've had the House, you had the Senate, you've had Democrats on site say there's nothing there. They want something to be there, but there is nothing there.
As far as Russia.
Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, I think at this stage, you have to be a fairly tunnel vision partisan, like Adam Schiff or Jared Nadler, to believe you've got much in the way of evidence to support some sort
Russian
of criminal
collusion.
activity associated with Russian collusion, at least based on what we know from what has been publicly released. But there is this other issue of the Southern District of New York, which we discussed yesterday, and we reviewed Andy McCarthy's comments over the weekend, his sort of bombshell comment that he expects Trump to be indicted based on his reading of the sentencing memo that emanated from the Southern District of New York as it pertains to these hush money transactions.
Yeah, they said that in court that the payments were made to Daniels and McDougal in coordination with and at the direction of Mr. Trump.
President Trump tweeting yesterday, Democrats can't find a smocking gun.
He meant to say smoking.
Tying the Trump campaign to Russia after James Comey's testimony. No smocking gun, no collusion.
He's consistent, okay?
That's because there was no collusion, so now the Dems go to a private transaction, wrongly call it a campaign contribution. Let's get the take of one Andy McCarthy, the E.F. Hutton of the legal commentariat, and I'm not talking about as copy editor for Trump's tweets. I'm talking about the legal matters. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, guys. How are you?
All right.
Let's see if we have the smocking gun, I guess.
Yes. Do you agree with Trump that there is no smocking gun with respect to Russian collusion?
Yeah, well, I would have been shocked if there were. I really think that what's happened here is we've really been led on a wild goose chase, which, I hate to be a broken record on this. I don't mean to make people's eyes glaze over and close their ears with legal esoterica. But the reason I thought it was important at the beginning here that there was no criminal investigation assigned to Mueller, that he was given a counterintelligence investigation, is they needed to identify the crime that he was allowed to look at in terms of Russian so-called collusion in order to have any hope of keeping this investigation finite and with defined parameters. And what they should have assigned to him, because this was the allegation that rationalized this whole thing, was there a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Kremlin to hack Democratic email accounts, this cyber espionage conspiracy that is discussed in the FISA affidavit, for the FISA warrant. If they had done that, I think what you could have justified saying is there wasn't probable cause for that at the beginning, but at least they gave him something definitive to investigate. That conspiracy obviously isn't there, and he could have closed the investigation. Instead, they gave him a counterintelligence investigation, which is just an information gathering exercise, and he got to continue to investigate until he found something. He still hasn't found a crime, but we've now moved the goalpost from the original claim that they conspired to hack the election to what I think they're now moved on to, which is that the Russians tried to infiltrate the Trump campaign. They had several agents of influence who were in and around the Trump campaign and Trump people were irresponsible in dealing with them. I think that's where they're going. Even if they could prove all that, it's all very interesting, but it's not a crime.
But what about campaign finance laws that were broken? Did he violate them in directing hush payments to Stormy Daniels and McDougal?
Yeah, Amy, I don't think so. I wrote this thing over the weekend, and I got some stuff back saying, what are you doing to President Trump? It's kind of like, it's like the weather guy says that it's going to rain today. It's like you're in your house trying to make it rain, Mm-hmm. All I'm saying is looking at what they're doing there, it sure looks to me like they're planning to indict him, and I can go through the reasons why with you if you'd like. I don't think there's a campaign finance violation here. I don't like the campaign finance laws for constitutional reasons. I don't think they should ever be handled as criminal violations. I think it's much better to deal with them as a administrative fine. But if you're going to get down to it as to whether this is a crime or not, I don't think it's an in-kind contribution. And the way I would try to frame that for people is this. What they're saying is that these non-disclosure payments, and by the way, non-disclosure agreements are completely legitimate. They're very common in civil litigation. What they're saying, though, is that these non-disclosure payments for these private arrangements that Trump made or that were made on his behalf with these women, they're saying that because of when they happened and the circumstances under which they happened, they're actually campaign expenditures, and therefore he had to disclose them under the campaign finance laws as if they were regular contributions. And what I say is, well, let's turn that around. Let's say that Trump assumed that they were campaign-related because of when they happened in the campaign calendar, and as a result he said, I think what I'm going to do is take campaign funds that have been donated to my campaign and use them to pay these women off. What do you think the Democrats would be saying if he had done that? What they would be saying, of course, is that he illegally diverted campaign funds for his own personal expenses.
Well, right.
So it seems to me that they get him coming or going, right? And that can't be a crime when they have you in that kind of where if they put you in a situation where no matter what you do, they're going to say that you violated the law, then what we essentially have is a kooky system that should not have anything to do with the criminal law.
Well, their case is so weak with respect to not only what you're describing, which is, as the Washington Examiner sort of colorfully analogized, by the logic from the Southern District of New York, every dime Chris Christie spent on diet books, Stairmasters, and bariatric surgery was a campaign expenditure. If it's all about whatever influences the election, well, I'm going to get in shape because I'm running for office. Well, that influences the election, so you have to report it. The other thing, though, is even the timing of the disclosure in terms of impacting the election would have to have been disclosed before November 6th. And if I'm remembering the timing properly, it wouldn't have been necessarily had to be disclosed on FEC reports until after the election. But even
right.
Even beyond those issues, doesn't the Southern, to your point about you think Trump's going to be indicted based on the rhetoric in the Southern District of New York's offering, doesn't the Southern District of New York U.S. Attorney have to get sign-off from Justice to move to indict the President of the United States, or anybody else for that matter?
Yeah, I must say, under the circumstances, I would think that they would have had to get sign-off to charge these counts against Cohen. And, because Mueller was clearly involved, which means Rosenstein, who is Deputy Attorney General, is involved. I would think they would have had to have gotten sign-off with respect to him. But, yeah, sure, they would have to get sign-off from the Justice Department. You're assuming that hasn't already happened, right?
Well, I'm assuming that hasn't happened, and I'm also wondering what William Barr's perspective is going to be on this.
Well, if it hasn't already happened, I would imagine he'll get to weigh in. If he analyzes it as a strict legal matter, and he hasn't been forced to make any commitments or induced to make any commitments in his confirmation hearings about whether he's going to have any involvement in that case or not. I imagine he'll look at it, and I hope if he looks at it as a straight legal matter, he will at least say that even assuming for argument's sake that this is a crime, if we look at precedent here and we look, for example, at the 2008 Obama campaign, where there was a $2 million campaign finance violation, nobody doubts that these actually were donations, unlike the Trump thing where there's an issue about whether it's an in-kind contribution or not.
Right.
But in the Obama campaign, where there were these $2 million worth of campaign violations, they allowed them to settle it by a $375,000 fine with the Federal Election Commission. And that the way this ought to be handled at best is that the Justice Department should stay its hand and let the Trump campaign work it out with the FEC.
Well, let's play it out the other way. Let's play it out your scenario that there's been sign-off, he gets indicted. Then what happens?
Well, he couldn't be indicted under current Justice Department guidance until after he has been, after he's out of office.
Right.
So you can't indict a sitting president. Now, I've always thought that was flawed advice, I must tell you, because that protection is not supposed to give the president any advantage that you or I wouldn't have with the criminal law. It's simply supposed to make it so that he doesn't have to deal with criminal proceedings while he's president. But here's the problem. There's a 5-year federal statute of limitations on most crimes, including these alleged crimes. Even if he weren't to win re-election, he wouldn't be out of office until 2021. I guess this is a 2016 offense. Yeah. They probably still have a few months. But if he won re-election, the statute of limitations would have lapsed.
Well, could you indict him?
I've always thought the guidance.
Could you indict him and wait?
Well, that's what, according as I understand the guidance, you couldn't, and that's why I think the guidance is flawed. I think you should be able to indict under seal, which stops the statute of limitations from running, and then unseal it when he gets out of office. But that's not what the guidance holds, at least as I understand it at the moment.
Now, there's a busy day today. Manafort may face new charges today. Mike Flynn files his sentencing memo seeking no jail time. And tomorrow, Michael Cohen is going to be sentenced in New York, in your former Southern District. How much time do you think he'll get behind bars?
The judges tend to go along with what the prosecutors recommend. I think here his guideline range was something like 51 to 61 months, and they recommended a slight shave off that because of his cooperation with Mueller. So I think they're saying something around the neighborhood of 42 months. That's probably what he'll get.
I want to get to your. I know you're friendly with him, Jim Comey, since he testified again on Friday. James Freeman's right up in the Wall Street Journal. He describes Comey as presenting himself as unaware and incurious regarding one of the most consequential investigations the FBI ever conducted. He described how little he knew about the federal government's use of its surveillance powers against associates of the presidential campaign out of power, and assured lawmakers that the investigation was free, of course, of political bias. And that's consistent with what Matt Gaetz, the congressman from Florida who sits on the Judiciary Committee, he heard the testimony, talked about as well, Jim Comey's selective amnesia. I mean, if you're a top lieutenant of incoming Attorney General William Barr, do you say, as a matter of course, and, the concepts like equal justice before the law, whether House Democrats want to continue these investigations started by House Republicans or not, we have a duty to go back and look at what happened in 2016 on the other side of the House, the presidential administration, as well as the senior leadership of the FBI, not to mention the Clintons.
Yeah, you're always responsible for keeping your own house clean, regardless of whether Congress is having a look at it or not. But I guess with respect to Barr in this particular time, I think the Inspector General is looking at that and is going to be issuing a report. And what I would want to know if I were Barr coming in is, number one, exactly what is the Inspector General's warrant? What precisely is he looking at? And then secondly, what I'd want to know, and what we have very little information on, is this guy from Utah that Sessions appointed, Huber, what has he been doing? Exactly what has he been looking at? Does he have a grand jury? What's the status of that investigation? What's the ambit of it? So I'd want to know all of those things, and then I would consider whether there were any sort of holes that needed to be filled, things that were slipping through the cracks that we needed to investigate. But I think he should start with talking to the IG and Uber and find out exactly what they've been up to.
Yeah, I'd like to know about that referral on McCabe, too, where that stands. He's
Right.
he's Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York, Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, one of the preeminent legal minds and commentators on all of these topics. Andy McCarthy, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
All right, guys. No smocking today.
No
Yeah.
smocking guns. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.